That reserve pension can be worth a lot. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today what I want to do is take a swing at trying to explain how reserve pensions are calculated. Now, this is one of those tangled bureaucratic messes that doesn't need to be complicated, but for some reason, it always turns out that way. So let's give this a shot. First, you got to remember that there are 5 factors influencing an Army pension. You got years of service, that 2.5% multiplier, and the average of the high 36 months of base pay. Then you got an annual COLA adjustment, and in the year of retirement, a partial COLA adjustment. And just so you know, it's that partial COLA adjustment that makes it possible to retire earlier and get a bigger pension. But those COLA adjustments are the same for a regular or a reserve pension. So for today's purposes, we're just going to focus on those first 3 factors: years of service, the 2.5% multiplier, and the high 36. Now, I want you to start by noticing something about the regular Army pension. There's 3 different ways that soldier's years of service are used in this calculation. Let's just consider a master sergeant with 22 years of service. First, we know he qualifies for a pension because he has more than 20 years of service. Second, we're going to multiply his 22 years of service times that 2.5% multiplier. And his highest months of base pay, well, they're probably going to come from the 20th, 21st, and 22nd years of service on the base pay chart. One number, 3 uses. But for a reserve pension, what Congress calls a non-regular pension, these 3 uses are each calculated differently. To figure out if a reserve soldier even qualifies for a pension, we have to consider the number of qualifying years that they've accumulated. To get a qualifying year, a good year, a reserve soldier has to accumulate 50 points in a 1-year period. You get 15 points just for being a member of a reserve component. So from there, you only need 35 more points. You get 1 point for every drill period, whether that's a 4-hour IDT period or a whole day of annual training. You also get 1 point if you do a funeral honors detail that lasts longer than 2 hours. If you want to see where you stand on accumulating points, you go and check out your chronological statement of retirement points. Okay, once you have 20 qualifying years, you get a letter notifying you that you qualify for a pension. But how much is that pension going to be worth? Well, to figure that out, we're going to have to move on to that 2.5% multiplier. Remember how a regular Army soldier just multiplies their years of service times that multiplier? Well, for the reserve soldier, you don't just multiply your good years times the multiplier. Instead, you got to go back to those retirement points you've been accumulating. You see that total all the way at the bottom of your statement of retirement points? Well, what you do is you take that number and you divide it by 360, effectively to figure out how many years of service you would have if you had performed every one of those points consecutively. Then you take that number and you multiply it times 2.5. And finally, remember how the high 36 of a regular Army soldier really had to do with how long they've been serving? Well, for a reservist, I think there's some good news here. Monthly base pay is calculated using the base pay that the reserve soldier would have been entitled to if they had been serving on active duty. And usually it's based off the 36 months preceding when they actually start their retirement, regardless of whether or not they stopped participating and became what's called a gray area retiree. Okay, let's go back to our hypothetical master sergeant with 22 years of service, but this time, let's assume that he's a reservist. As long as he doesn't have more than 2 non-qualifying years, he's going to get a pension. And let's assume that he has like 2,846 points. When you divide that by 360 days, it works out to 7.91 years. Multiply that by 2.5 to get a 19.87% multiplier. Now, this guy has 22 years of service, which means that if he joined the reserves straight out of high school, he's probably about 40 years old. But here's the weird thing about reservists. They can't collect their pension until they're 60 years old, except in some special situations where there's an early retirement option. For our reserve master sergeant, his base pay is going to be calculated from the far right end of the table. That's when he's closer to 60. So we take that multiplier times $7,069 and get a monthly pension of $1,398.25. If you want, there's a DoD calculator that helps you work all of this out, but for some reason it's always under development, which seems dumb to me since this retirement system has been in place since like 1980. But as far as I can tell, DoD always seems a little bit hesitant to give you an official estimate of what your pension's going to be. I don't know, maybe because they're afraid they'll get it wrong and then you'll sue them. So it always seems like they just want to give you garbled information. I can't guarantee that I do any better, but if you want to see how the VA really thinks about your disability, watch this video.